From the moment we are born, our psyche begins to form through the experiences we live, especially those that happen in childhood. What many don't know is that those early experiences don't just shape our personality, they also become etched into the deepest parts of our unconscious, influencing our decisions, relationships, and the way we perceive life. Carl Jung dedicated much of his life to studying the power of the unconscious and discovered something astonishing. The wounds of childhood don't disappear with time. On the contrary, they hide in our shadow, that space within us where we store everything we've repressed, ignored, or rejected. And though we may think we've left them behind, they're still there, operating in the dark, guiding our emotions, our reactions, and even our deepest beliefs. Maybe at some point you've wondered why certain situations affect you more than others, why you react so intensely to specific words or gestures, or why, no matter how hard you try to change, you always end up in similar relationships or circumstances. The answer isn't in the outside world, but in your inner world. Imagine for a moment that your mind is like a house. The visible part, what you show to the world, is your consciousness. But beneath that structure, there's a basement, a dark place where all your repressed memories, unresolved traumas, and emotions you once felt but didn't know how to handle are stored. Jung called this basement the shadow, and what many don't realize is that the more we ignore what's in that space, the more power it has over us. Childhood is a crucial stage because that's when our mind is most receptive. We have no filters. We absorb everything around us without questioning it. If in those early years we experienced rejection, abandonment, humiliation, or any other form of emotional pain, those wounds become imprinted in our psyche, shaping how we relate to others and to ourselves. For example, a child who grows up feeling rejected might become an adult who constantly seeks validation, fearful of being abandoned. Or someone humiliated in childhood might develop a perfectionist personality, obsessed with avoiding mistakes to never feel that shame again. These wounds don't simply heal with time. They transform into unconscious patterns we repeat over and over until we decide to face them. Jung discovered that the only way to heal these wounds is to bring them out of the shadow and into the light of consciousness. It's not about blaming those who hurt us or reliving the pain unnecessarily. It's about understanding the impact these experiences have had on us and how we can free ourselves from them. One of the most common ways childhood wounds manifest in adulthood is through our relationships. Before moving on, I want to tell you that my book is now available. It's full of advice and techniques to help you overcome emotional blocks and love yourself more. Find the link in the description and the pinned comment. Let's continue. Have you ever noticed that you attract people who reflect the exact same problems you experienced in childhood? This isn't a coincidence. Jung spoke of the phenomenon of projection, where our unconscious pushes us to recreate past patterns in the hope of finding resolution. If you didn't receive unconditional love in childhood, it's likely that in adulthood you constantly seek approval, attracting people who reinforce that sense of lack. If you grew up in an environment where love was conditional on your performance or behavior, you might find it hard to relax in a relationship without feeling you must constantly strive to be worthy of affection. But here's the key. What you see in others is nothing more than a reflection of what hasn't healed within you. Every relationship, every conflict, every intense emotion that arises in your life is an opportunity to see clearly what your unconscious has been trying to show you. It's not about changing others, but about looking at yourself honestly and asking, what wound is this situation showing me? This process of self-discovery and healing isn't easy. It requires courage because it means confronting parts of ourselves we've avoided for years, but it's also the path to true freedom. Jung said that until the unconscious becomes conscious, the subconscious will direct your life, and you'll call it fate. The good news is that although childhood wounds can influence our adult lives, we're not doomed to repeat the same cycle over and over. Once we identify these patterns, we can start to transform them. And when we do, something incredible happens. We reclaim our authenticity. We stop living on autopilot and begin making decisions from a place of consciousness and personal power. This is just the first part of this healing journey. In the next part, we'll dive deeper into how you can start integrating these parts of yourself to turn pain into strength and uncover the true essence of your being. When we begin to become aware of the wounds we carry from childhood, it's normal to feel resistance. Our unconscious has built defense mechanisms over years to avoid pain, to make us believe everything's fine, that we've already overcome what once hurt us. But the reality is that until we dare to look at those wounds head on, they'll keep influencing our lives without us realizing it. The human mind is an expert at self-deception. It's easier to blame others for our experiences, to say we had bad luck in love, work, or life in general, than to accept that it's us who keep repeating the same patterns over and over. Jung spoke of the concept of individuation, the process by which a person becomes their most authentic whole self. But this path can't be walked without first looking within and recognizing those parts we've ignored, repressed, or projected onto others. One of the clearest signs that childhood wounds are still operating in our adult lives is the feeling of emptiness. That sense that something's missing, that despite achieving certain goals or receiving external validation, nothing seems to be enough. It's a hard feeling to describe, but one many people have experienced at some point. And what Jung discovered is that this emptiness isn't a sign something's wrong with us. It's a call from our unconscious to reconnect with our essence. From childhood, we're taught to seek outside ourselves, in the recognition of others, in our parents' approval, in material success. But what few tell us is that if those foundations weren't built on a solid identity, everything we seek outside will only serve as a temporary patch. And this is where many people feel trapped. They try to fill that emptiness with relationships, work, distractions, anything to avoid sitting in silence and facing themselves. But the problem is the unconscious won't be fooled. If there are unhealed wounds, they'll keep manifesting in different ways. Anxiety, dissatisfaction, fear of loneliness, emotional dependency, insecurity. No matter how much we try to cover them with external achievements, they'll always find a way to make themselves felt because their purpose isn't to punish us, but to push us toward healing. The key to healing childhood wounds isn't ignoring them, it's integrating them. Jung said the shadow isn't our enemy, but a part of us that needs to be seen, understood, and accepted. Every repressed emotion, every fear we've buried deep within, has a message for us. We can't free ourselves from something we're unwilling to look at. This is where many people face a dilemma. On one hand, they know there are things inside them that need work. On the other, they fear what they might find. And that's completely natural. Looking at our wounds means reliving the pain, recognizing there were moments we felt helpless, that there were people who hurt us, and that in many cases, we never got the validation or love we needed. But the important thing is to understand that we're no longer that vulnerable child. Now we have the ability to give ourselves what we lacked back then. Healing doesn't mean forgetting what happened or justifying the actions of those who hurt us. It means freeing ourselves from the weight we still carry, letting go of the identity we built from those experiences, and allowing ourselves to be who we really are without the chains of the past. If in childhood you learned that love had to be earned through effort, that you had to be good to be accepted, that your emotions were a problem, it's likely that today you feel you can't show yourself as you are, that you must please others to be loved, that you need to be perfect to be worthy of love. But none of that is true. Those are just beliefs your mind absorbed at a time when you had no other choice, when you depended entirely on the outside world to feel safe. Now you have a choice. You can keep carrying those wounds, or you can start doing something different. And this is where true transformation begins. Because when you dare to question those beliefs, when you decide to look at yourself with compassion instead of judgment, something inside you changes. It's as if suddenly you have permission to be yourself, without fear, without guilt, without needing to prove anything to anyone. Jung said true strength isn't in denying our shadows, but in integrating them. And when we do, when we stop seeing our wounds as something that weakens us and start understanding them as a source of learning and growth, we discover a truth that changes everything. Our greatest strength has always been within us. But this process doesn't happen overnight. It's not enough to hear these words and expect everything to magically change. Transformation requires action, commitment. It's a path that must be walked with intention, with a genuine desire to change. Because at the end of the day, no one else can do it for you. You're the only one who can decide to stop living based on the past and start creating a new reality from consciousness. And this is where many people face their greatest challenge, the fear of change. Because even when the past has been painful, it's still familiar. We've grown used to certain patterns, certain dynamics, certain types of relationships. Stepping out of that can be scary. But what Jung taught us is that fear isn't a sign to stop. It's an invitation to keep going. When you start making changes, when you decide to act from a place of self-love instead of fear or need, the world around you begins to change too. The people who once fit in your life might no longer do so. The old habits that once felt comforting might start to feel suffocating. And that's completely normal. It means you're growing. There's no transformation without discomfort because the new always challenges the old. But every time you choose your authenticity over conditioning, every time you choose your well-being over external approval, you're taking a step closer to your true essence. This doesn't mean you'll never feel pain or fear again. It means that when those feelings come up, you'll no longer see them as an enemy, but as a reminder that there are still parts of you that need to be heard and embraced. And instead of running from them, instead of ignoring or projecting them onto others, you'll have the ability to look at them with compassion and turn them into something that strengthens you. That's true liberation. It's not about completely erasing the pain of the past. It's about learning to live without it controlling us. It's about taking everything we've lived through and using it as a tool for our growth instead of a prison that keeps us trapped in the same story over and over. When you start seeing your wounds from this perspective, something inside you changes. You're no longer a victim of your story. You're the creator of your destiny. No matter what happened before, no matter how deep the wounds you carry, you always have the ability to transform them. And when you do, you realize the power was never in the past, never in the people who hurt you. It was always in your ability to choose, to heal, to be who you really are without fear, without guilt, without needing to prove anything to anyone. That's the gift Jung left us. The certainty that when we face our shadows and embrace our story with courage, we discover that the root of our true strength has always been within us. When you start seeing life from this new perspective, you begin to notice things that went unnoticed before. You realize how every experience, every challenge, every intense emotion you felt throughout your life has been part of a bigger process. Nothing has been random. Everything has been there to show you something about yourself, to help you uncover the parts of you that you'd forgotten or denied. Carl Jung spoke of the importance of making the unconscious conscious, of bringing to light everything we've repressed so we can integrate it. Because what we deny controls us, but what we accept sets us free. And it's in that act of acceptance where true transformation happens. Many people think healing means completely eliminating the pain of the past, erasing difficult memories, or pretending they never existed. But real healing doesn't work that way. It's not about forgetting, it's about reframing, giving new meaning to what we've lived through so that instead of being a burden, it becomes a source of wisdom and strength. Think about the version of you that was a child, that child you once were who still lives inside you. What did they need to hear back then? What words would have given them comfort, security, love? How would their life have changed if someone had told them they were enough, that they didn't have to prove anything to anyone, that their worth didn't depend on others' opinions? That child is still inside you, waiting for someone to listen, someone to understand. And that someone is you, because no one else can give them what they need. No one else can heal them. Only you can take their hand, hug them, and tell them everything's okay, that they don't have to fight anymore, that they're safe now. This is where the work of healing becomes deeply personal, because it's not about waiting for the world to change, for the people who hurt us to apologize, for external circumstances to align with our expectations. It's about doing an inner work, of learning to give ourselves what we once sought from others. When you do this, when you start speaking to yourself with love, respecting your emotions instead of judging them, allowing yourself to be without fear of disapproval, something inside you changes. It's as if suddenly an enormous weight lifts off your shoulders. And the most surprising thing is that when you change, everything around you changes too. The relationships that once hurt you stop having power over you. The patterns you used to repeat begin to dissolve. The situations that once seemed inevitable start to transform because you're no longer operating from the wound. You're operating from consciousness. This is a process that takes time. It doesn't happen overnight, but every small step counts. Every time you choose to listen to yourself instead of ignoring yourself, every time you choose to love yourself instead of demanding from yourself, every time you allow yourself to be, instead of adapting, you're moving forward. And little by little, you realize you're no longer the same person. The version of you that lived on autopilot, that reacted without understanding why, that felt trapped in a cycle of pain, that version is fading. In its place, someone new is emerging. Someone who no longer needs others' approval to feel valuable. Someone who no longer clings to the past because they've learned to live in the present. Someone who's discovered that true strength doesn't come from pretending to be strong, but from daring to be vulnerable, authentic, real. Jung said that individuation, the process of becoming our most complete self, isn't a destination we reach, but a path we walk constantly. There's no final point where we can say, I'm done. There's always more to discover, more to learn, more to integrate, and that's what makes this journey so fascinating. Every day is a new opportunity to know yourself, to listen to yourself, to keep healing. No matter how far you've come or how many setbacks you've had, what matters is that you keep going. Because every step you take on this path not only frees you, it also inspires others to do the same. And when you look back, when you remember everything you've lived through, all the times you fell and got back up, all the times you thought you couldn't go on and still did, you realize something incredible. You were always stronger than you thought. You always had within you the ability to heal, to transform your life, to become the person you were meant to be. That power has always been in you. And now that you know it, the question is, what are you going to do with it? What you decide to do with this power is what truly defines your life. Because once you become aware of everything you've carried, of all the wounds that have shaped your path, you can't ignore it anymore. You can't keep acting as if you don't know there's something bigger, something deeper inside you that's always been waiting to be discovered. At this point in the process, many people feel fear. Fear of letting go of the identity they've built based on their wounds. Fear of releasing the guilt, the resentment, the pain they've carried for years. Because though it seems paradoxical, pain also becomes a comfort zone. We get used to it. We identify with our scars, and in a way, it gives us a sense of purpose. But holding on to the past, holding on to the wounds, is like clinging to an anchor in the middle of the ocean and wondering why you can't move forward. The healing process requires letting go, trusting that you don't need that weight to define you. At first, it can be hard. There'll be moments when you'll want to return to old patterns, when your mind will try to convince you it's safer to stay as you are. But this is where true transformation happens. Every time you consciously choose to respond differently, every time you decide to act from love instead of fear, every time you give yourself permission to be without seeking external validation, you're breaking invisible chains that have bound you your whole life. Jung spoke of the importance of integrating the shadow, of accepting all parts of ourselves instead of rejecting them. Because true strength doesn't come from being perfect, it comes from being whole. And being whole means embracing our light and our shadows, our fears and our virtues, our vulnerability and our capacity to heal. When you start doing this, you realize something incredible. The power you once gave to others, the validation you sought outside, the answers you hoped to find elsewhere, it was always inside you. You don't need anyone to tell you you're enough because you already are. You don't need to prove anything because your worth isn't in what you do, it's in who you are. This is one of the most powerful realizations in the healing process. Because when you reach this point, your energy changes. You no longer operate from lack, from the need to fill voids with the external. Now you realize that everything you've been searching for has always been within you. And when your energy changes, the world around you changes too. The relationships that once hurt you no longer have the same effect on you. The situations that once seemed inescapable begin to transform. And most importantly, you start attracting people and experiences into your life that reflect this new state of consciousness. Not because life gets easier, but because you're now seeing it with different eyes. You're no longer the same person who reacted from the wound. Now you act from healing. And that changes everything. It's an ongoing process. There's no point where you can say, I'm finished, because there's always more to discover, more to learn, more to integrate. But every step you take, every time you choose to look at yourself with love instead of judgment, every time you allow yourself to be without fear of what others think, you get closer to your true self. And when you get there, when you finally realize who you really are, everything you've overcome, all the strength that's always been in you, you understand a truth that changes everything. You were never fragile. You were never broken. You were always whole. You just needed to remember. And when you remember who you really are, when you understand that you were never a reflection of your wounds, but the being who's managed to transcend them, something inside you changes forever. You no longer define yourself by the past because you know every experience, even the most painful ones, was part of the path that brought you here. You no longer cling to what could have been because you understand everything happened exactly as it had to for you to awaken to your true power today. At this point, you realize the outside world no longer has the same influence over you. Not because difficulties disappear, but because now you know how to face them from consciousness, not from the wound. You don't need life to be perfect to feel at peace. You don't seek others to fill your voids because there are no voids left to fill. You've learned to give yourself what you always sought outside. And that's true freedom. But this path doesn't end here. Because just as you've awakened to this truth, there are thousands of people still trapped in their own shadows, still repeating the same patterns without understanding why, who haven't yet discovered that within them lies the same capacity for healing and transformation. And this is where you can make a difference. If this message resonated with you, if at any point in this video you felt something awaken inside you, then don't keep it just for yourself. Share this information, because every time you do, you give someone else the chance to start their own healing journey. Leave your comment below. Tell me what part of this message touched your heart the most, or what experience in your life made you realize it was time to heal. Your words could be the light someone else needs to take their first step. And every time you interact with this content, you're helping it reach more people, helping this community of transformation grow, helping more people awaken and discover their own inner strength. Subscribe if you haven't already and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Each video is a new opportunity to dive deeper into these topics, to keep exploring the mind, the unconscious, and the tools that let us transform our reality from within. Because the world needs more people living from authenticity, more people who've healed their wounds and are ready to help others do the same. And if you're here, if you've made it this far, it's because there's a strength inside you much greater than you imagine. It's time to embrace it. It's time to share it. It's time to be the best version of yourself. See you in the next video. And remember, all the power you seek outside has always been within you.